So, should everyone, you all have the source sheet? If you have, you can just put it on the chair. Just yeah, it's all the same. So there's 3 pages, so 3 mini pages. All right, so Chag Sameach, everybody. Modim L'Simcha. Welcome to the Beth Lita Sukkah, whether in person or virtually. And we have a really wonderful space that we're able to share together, which is really quite special. But also, having to rethink what hospitality looks like during this holiday, including virtual hospitality and virtual presences. And if you want to actually check out the class we did earlier this week on Ushpizin, we actually kind of used Ushpizin as a model of what kind of this like holographic virtual presence looks like, of inviting in these spiritual presences, even though physically, that's not physical hospitality, but how to think about what it means to invite people in, even though they're not physically there. But today, actually, I want to talk about the space that we're sharing, whether it's the tent, the chuppah over there, or whether it's the sukkah over here, which is this sheltering space. That Sukkot is a holiday that really does focus our attention on space. People often say, oh, Judaism's not a relationship about space, it's a religion about time, right? Sacred time, Shabbos, Yontif. But we know that there's also a spatial element to it as well. And Sukkot, as a holiday, really brings our attention to what it means to share space with people, but also the quality of the space that we create together. There's a really beautiful and powerful reading of the transition of the holiday and it culminates in Sukkot. And you think, where does the process start? You'd think it starts with Rosh Hashanah, but to Rabbi Alan Liu of blessed memory, the process of the holiday actually starts Tisha B'Av. Because Tisha B'Av, where our sense of security and our sense of emplacement is taken away from us. We experience what it's like to lose a home. And what it means to move through Tishrei, the holidays of Tishrei, is to learn how to build ourselves back up again after we've been stripped to the bones. And then what does it mean to start to build a home again? But the kind of home that we build, Rabbi Liu underscores, is not just like another big brick building. It's a home that lets us never forget that it is something that we built. It's something that's very tentative. It has a roof that leaks, right? You never forget the vulnerability that we learned on Tisha B'Av. You don't just like regress and go back to a safe, secure fortress. You learn how to develop resilience and learn how to survive what it's like to have a shelter, but also to know that it's never going to fully ever protect you in whole, as we wait for the time in which there will be a shelter that can protect us in home and whole when Mashiach comes. But now I want to kind of, what does it mean to pay attention to this feeling of being sheltered, even and especially after the vulnerability that we've been through during the Yamim Noraim, during the High Holy Days. And fascinatingly, beautifully, one of the most common images you see in the Kabbalistic and Chasidic literature about the Sukkah is the image of the mother. That the Sukkah represents the maternal aspect of God. It's actually a very daring, radical theological image. That the Sukkah represents the aspect of God that is drawing us close again. After we've gone through the period of judgment, of reverence, of awe, of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we come through that to a feeling of acceptance. And that feeling of acceptance is materialized in a shelter that welcomes us in, and in a shelter that comforts us and provides for us a sense of relief. So I want to first look at a text from the Yosher Divrei Emes, from the early Hasidic rabbi, Meshulam Feibish Heller of Zabaraj. Say that 5 times fast. And in it, he talks about what the sukkah is. He says, Achibuk hamirumaz basukkah. What is this? The sukkah isn't just a building, it's a text. And just like the Torah communicates to us in hints and in signs, so does the physical object of the sukkah. And what does the sukkah communicate to us? It's a hug. The sukkah is a chibuk. right? It's an embrace. It brings you close. It's an intimate gesture. Kamo Adam shemechabek espino be'ahavaso oso bizrosav yakifenu. It's incredible language, and I'll bring our attention to that in a second. Just like a parent who brings their child close to them and with their limbs, with their arms, encircles them. Now, the language of yakifenu is a really interesting and powerful language because it's the same language, lahakif, that we have on Simchas Torah. Right? On Sukkot, we have the Hoshanos, where we encircle the space that we're praying in with our lulav and esrog. But on Simchas Torah, we have hakafos, which means not just encircling, but actually means surrounding. It means in bringing like a circular enclosure around. And we do that with the Torah. We, in a sense, with our dancing, we provide this hakafa, this encircling, this hug, this dancing hug of the Torah. Just as God embraces us in the Sukkah, we return that gesture to God by embracing God through the Torah with our dancing. In Kabbalah, there's two aspects of divine light. There's the light that infuses and suffuses, or shemale, and there's the light that encircles, or hamakif. And that encircling light is usually thought of as more transcendent, more beyond, more removed. But this is an incredible inversion because the hakafa, the encircling, the surrounding here, it's not because it's like an orbiting satellite. It's like a parent bringing their child close with their arms. I just want to take a second just to think materially, like physically, like bodily about that image, to be the intimacy of that, the way in which it's not, again, it's not the safety of the fortress of the temple. It's the intimacy of the closeness of the embrace. We don't have this fantasy that we're going to be protected from things that are going to happen to us anymore, but what we do have is the trust and the built back up relationship of what it means to have that closeness with someone who's bringing you close. Yeah.
Is it okay to ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
What's a holiday before the destruction of the second temple?
Yeah, Sukkot was a holiday before the destruction of the second temple for sure. But it received much more attention actually with King Yoshiyahu. That was during the first temple. But I think interestingly, like it really gets a lot of play in that way later in Jewish history relative to the Torah. But also interestingly, Hanukkah is modeling itself after it's like Sukkot's version 2.0. It's also an 8-day holiday. It's also about like dedicating a space. And interestingly, the Chasidim actually see this process that begins with Rosh Hashanah or even Tisha B'Av as culminating with Hanukkah. The Hanukkah is actually the final sealing of the judgment. It's the final attempt to bring that spirit and energy down. Great question. Okay. So the arms. The hug is in two gestures. Actually, Max here is a dancer. The gesture is the gesture is the language, right? The hug is two gestures. One gesture is this, where you use your arms, and what's the second aspect of it? When you imagine hugging a child or hugging like a niece or a nephew or nibbling, right? The other side of like a deep hug is also the head, right? So the arms encircle you to bring you close like this, and that's the walls of the sukkah. And then the head goes on top to provide shelter, and that's the schach. So literally, well, actually rather quite literally, figuratively speaking, the sukkah is the embodiment or the materializing of a hug. It is a hug in a building because it's these walls and it's also this shelter on top. And not only that, but I think the Yosher Divrei Emes is trying to communicate to us that when you enter the sukkah, there's an opportunity to feel hugged. There's an opportunity to feel hugged. Now, I don't know about you, but especially during coronavirus, I'm like jonesing for a hug. I don't think I've hugged anyone since March. And that's a really long time. But how can I then, I think Sukkahs for me, I've been really productively trying to think, how can Sukkahs be a response to eternity, but also a response to this moment? And the aspects of love in Sukkahs have really been speaking to me, because while material loving gestures are much harder to come by for people who are not in a bubble or anything like that, but if I'm able to feel that sense of embrace, to feel that sense of love and intimacy when I'm in the sukkah, it's an opportunity for an intentional intervention and to use the halachic tools to actually let them speak and let them speak to us. So he really is this beautiful, intense, and very Jewish halachic reading, interpretation, perush of this building. He keeps on saying, the arms. Okay, well, according to the halacha, there need to be 2 walls. So there's 2 arms that are hugging you. And not just that, but it has to be 2 walls and also a little bit of a wall. So just like that, what you have is one joint of the arm, another joint of the arm, that's 2 walls, and then your hand. And that's the sukkah. 2 walls and then a little wall. Right, there's a really fun thing is that the word sukkah spells out the 3 ways you can have a sukkah. A samech is 4 walls, a kaf is 3 walls, and a hey is 2 walls and a little bit. It's an amazing coincidence. So the minimal shear, the minimal measure of a sukkah is a hug. It is 2 walls and a little bit. And the little bit's really important, because if it was just the arm, it wouldn't actually encircle you. You need the hand to bring you close. And that's the thing. It's not just about surrounding or being encompassed. It's about being brought in close. And then the head goes over you, as he says, just like the schach. And the schach is the sheltering of the head. And all of it, he says, is a parable for being embraced. Hakol mashal v'alila le'inyan echibuk. I want to just dwell on that for a quick second. It's a mashal. And that's the word that the rabbis use for a metaphor or a parable. But he's saying a sukkah is a text. And the meaning of the text isn't a word. It's an experience. Because the sukkah is a physical, material text. The object of the sukkah communicates something meaningful. And what is the meaning that it's communicating? The feeling of being embraced. It's the feeling of being brought in close. So the way to read the sukkah is to be hugged by it. That way you're letting the sukkah speak to you in its language. Being brought near to God in joy and a pure spirit. All right, I just want to take a pause with that. Thoughts, reactions, outrage, something that comes to mind.
How are you supposed to, how do you feel this warmth in a sukkah? What practical things? How does that actually translate besides thinking of it symbolically?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think they're kind of the rubber of the rule hits the road of subjectivity, in the sense that great, this is why everyone gets to design their own sukkah. So this year, ironically, this is a very open air sukkah, because that way we can still see each other. And the reason I did that was because the way to feel love and embrace right now is having as safe of an environment as possible. So instead of having a full walled sukkah in which it's totally enclosed, in which the air can't circulate, I decided to say, okay, we're going to have 2 walls and a little bit. And what are the 3 walls technically? And you see actually these rope walls right here and rope walls over there are technically halachic walls, because they're using lavud. Each string is less than a certain amount of distance, and because of that, it's seen as a continuous amount of material. But that way, air can move back and forth. So I wasn't thinking of the decorations. I've never been really good at decorations. I don't have a very good aesthetic sense or anything like that. But I was thinking of it in terms of ethically, politically, and community-wise. What would make this feel like a loving and embracing sukkah? To be able to have as many people safely gather as possible, and to be able to have people not feel concerned or anxious while they're here. But that's tied to this moment. I guess I think it's a beautiful question. So I want to turn it around and say, what are things that we could maybe in future years, in normal years or something, or right now, what are ways that we could add to our Sukkah experience to bring that sense of embrace? What can we add to a Sukkah to have that feeling? Mm-hmm. All right, so Elise just suggested having an intentionality component that like not using a sukkah in kind of like an accidental way, but actually using it including a meditation that would help you like give yourself time to really think about that theme and to feel that. Great. I don't know if you've ever been to like a Hasidic area, especially, but like for a lot of people, like they'll build like a sukkah like with mamish like wooden walls, and there's an idea actually you're supposed to make the sukkah your residence that's ikr, and you're supposed to make your house arai. Supposed to make the sukkah where you really live, and you make your house like like a place, your storage shed effectively. Now, interestingly, autobiographically, I've actually been kicked out of my apartment this week because an electrician is rewiring my place. So because of that, I can't be around. So I have set up shop here, and I've just been here all day since basically all of Sukkot. So I've been literally, the Sukkah of Bethlita has been Iker, and my house is like, I mean, the shul is Arai, and my house is like Arai. My house is like, it's covered in tarps right now. I can barely use it. And it's been a really like interesting and productive sense of displacement and re-emplacement. But actually, so a lot of people will bring their furniture into the sukkah. Like they'll have these plush like divans, and it's like, yeah, if I can like chill in my favorite lazy boy, I'm gonna feel that sense of like being enveloped. I'm gonna feel that sense of like feeling comforted in my home. But there is that dialectic. There's that interesting balance, that tension, that really interesting productive tension between that sense of embrace, but also the sense of being displaced, right? A sense of actually not being tied to any one place or not anyone. This is Sukkah is supposed to also be like reminding us the kinds of shelters we had in the desert, which we could easily pack up and move away. And the original temple, the sanctuary, was also a thing that could be packed up and moved. So a sense of that kind of mobility, a sense of that kind of displacement.
Now that you said that, to answer your question,
Mm-hmm.
I never thought about Sukkot this way, but then, so the way that I would do it is next year, I would have a Sukkah. I don't have one in my house. But if I still lived in my house with my parents, I would make it like super cozy and like spend a lot of time in there and like like make it relaxing, like sofas and stuff.
Yeah, Huga Sukkah 2021. Or Huga? That was like a whole thing.
What's
it's like Norwegian.
It's Danish.
Danish for.
Yeah, for kind of cozy, like Heimish.
Well, I wonder if it's related to the word hug. It's probably not, but I'm gonna say midrash-wise it is. Huga means hug. Yeah, but it's cozy. It's like this, like it's very like, I think Canadians get it too. It's right. It's like it's wearing your wool socks basically once October starts, right? And like even though it's not that cold, you just always have your wool socks on. It just feels great. I'm wearing leggings, like I'm wearing like under my pants, and I've just been like super warm and cozy. It's great. Yeah, let's stay excited. All right, let's keep on moving because the next text is very, very long, and we're gonna skip around in it, and that's why I numbered it to make sure that we can like bop around in different paragraphs if we need to. So this is a text from the Sfas Emes, and in it he takes us deeper into this image of the hug, namely who is, and here I'm going to speak, archetypically, and I don't mean this in a restrictive way. I don't mean to be overly like normative about which parent occupies this position. But if we talk about like Freud and we talk about just the ways in which historically speaking this has worked, the image of the mother is what he's really focusing on. The mother as a site of intimacy and closeness. This is not just in Freud, also in Melanie Klein, right, and other object relations psychoanalysts as well, that the site of the mother, the infant and the mother, is a specific site of intimacy that's not replicated anywhere else in nature. And I think while we have really productive and radicalizing images of paternal intimacy or other parental intimacy, and all these things are true, we should propagate those as much as we can, there's something still special, and I would even say unique, about the site, the connection between the mother and the infant. And that is what the Sfas Emes is going to dare to meditate on here. And I think it's a really radical intervention he's making. Okay, he says, in the Zohar, it calls the Sukkah Sila Dimnamnusa, Kamosha Kasu, like it's written. I remember you in the tenderness of your youth. Now, Sila Dimnamnusa is a phrase in the Zohar that in Aramaic that means the shade of faith. Sila, Sail, Mehamnusa is the Aramaic word for Emunah. And interestingly, that's the language they use all the time. Now, the language of faith in the Zohar doesn't just mean like a set of beliefs. Faith for them is actually their way of talking about the experience of being with the aspects of God. It is the awareness and the experience of the Sfirot. So for them, faith, because the Raza Dimnamnusa, the secret of faith, it's not just like, P.S., there's a God, surprise. It's P.S., there's a God, and here's a specific way that human beings have to relate to God, and I'm going to let you into this unique and powerful spiritual technology. So when we talk about Sila Dimnamnusa, the shade of faith, we're saying, the Sukkah is bringing us into this divine space, this access point with the persona of God in some way, personalities of God. I remember you in the tenderness of your youth, and that's the pasuk he focuses on. Zacharti lach chesed ni'urai. And that's a powerful pasuk for the Sfas Emes to mention, because if we bring our attention back to Yom Kippur, we see the image of the soft, vulnerable child show up again and again and again. Habein yakir li Ephraim, right? My child, my dear one of Ephraim. And Zacharti lach chesed ni'urayich shows up as well. I remember you the tenderness of your youth. That's in this whole series of things which we ask God to remember us in the good old days. But the tenderness, the vulnerability there is the point. Because we're asking God to be mindful and to bring back into awareness the intimacy of that relationship between the young, vulnerable child and God as parent. And even, as we'll see in a bit, God as mother. Just like how you went after me in the desert. Now that is actually an image more of like a relationship, a romance. Like that the desert is seen in two ways in rabbinic literature. One is as a time in which we screwed up all the time. We're rebellious. We're always complaining. Wah, wah, wah. I want quail, right? But the way that the desert is described in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, and we just saw this, is it's seen as a time in which there was honey from the rock. Right, and that too actually is a maternal image. We're suckling honey from the rock. That manna is like mother's milk. It's a time of intimacy. So just like this love that is expressed in the verse every year after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, a person is rescued from her sins and transgressions, which is called redemption. Okay, so the experience of Yom Kippur, we always mess this up. The experience of Yom Kippur isn't judgment. It's release. Because Yom Kippur is the day of atonement. It's the day of forgiveness. And what it means to be forgiven, think about this in terms of debt. What does it mean to be forgiven from a debt? You're released from it. Someone says, okay, you owed me something, and now you are forgiven. You no longer owe me anything. You are free. You are released. After Yom Kippur, we are released. We are released. We are then led to, as the Shalom Feibish Heller said, we're then led to be able to be brought near again. We don't have anything in the way anymore. There's nothing blocking us anymore. All we need to do is just let ourselves go and follow like the path of least resistance, to let our natural soul and our true pure self that we've gotten back to, right, the authentic self that we've rediscovered through Teshuvah, to let that draw us and lead us back to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's redemption. That's Geula. Okay. And in those days, the Yamim Norayim. So what's the Sfas Emes really trying to attend to? The Sfas Emes is trying to attend to the transition from Yom Kippur to Sukkot. The question was asked. Susie asked this question, and it's a great one. When we were chatting earlier this week. Why does Sukkot happen after Yom Kippur? It seems like it should be more along the lines of Passover, because we're talking about traveling in the desert after being released. True. And there's not a historical reason. That's a very good pircha. It's a very good challenge. But the reasoning, as the Sfas Emes is getting into, and this is exactly what this class is trying to like explore, is more phenomenological and spiritual than it is historical. That Sukkot works experientially as a powerful and a necessary follow-up to Yom Kippur. Because if Yom Kippur ended and all we had was just that, like, okay, good, you're forgiven, and then there wasn't any follow-up, it would fail. It's like a teacher, right? Like going through a class and it gives you all the information you need. And then it says, great, good, now you're an electrical engineer. Right here, here's a book about electrical engineering. Go rewire this circuit. You can do it. No, because that's not what good pedagogy is. Good pedagogy and good relationship is it means to have a follow-up. It means to have a follow-through. It means to have a meeting after the meeting to make sure that whatever happened in the room sticks, which makes sure that you have the tools you need to develop what it is that only was really begun. Yom Kippur isn't the ending. Yom Kippur is a new beginning. And if there was no follow-up after a new beginning, it means you don't really get it. And you don't have the help that you need. To be just like left out on your own, it's like you could die of exposure. Sukkot is necessary because it gives you the shelter you need, an incubating space, a womb, as it were, in which you can develop again. Because Yom Kippur is you are a Bria Chadasha. You are a new creature. And what does any new creature need? A safe environment in which they are able to develop again. Sukkot. It is a sheltering environment that we need to be able to do, to recommit, to rebuild, and to reconnect. So in those days, the Yamim Noraim, the high holy days, each person became like a child just born. Each Yisrael kekatan shenoilad, like a baby that was just birthed. V'hu katan hatzarich le'imo, and like every infant, it needs its mother. Literally, right? This isn't like a metaphor. But I mean, there's metaphorical significance to it, but the infant needs the mother, needs source of food, needs protecting presence, needs to be able to survive. A baby can't survive on its own. This is like the Torah of vulnerability, right? To expect a baby to like survive on its own means you miss the point of what babies are. Babies are an opportunity to experience, to not just experience, but to practice love, to practice care and cultivation. You're part of a network of interconnectedness and interdependence. Like to kick a baby out and be like, great, baby, you're on your own. Good luck. And the baby toddles off somewhere or whatever. Literally impossible. So, v'chivyachol habore yisbarach manhigaisanu be'ela hayamim ke'em levanim. As it were, if I could say such a thing, and this is what the rabbis say when they're going to say something radical and true, but they feel justified in doing so. The Holy Blessed One behaves with us, treats us as if we were like a mother with her children. It is explicit here that a necessary and holy aspect of God is maternal. And to, I guess, like the stereotypical vision of like bearded father God in Judaism is descriptively wrong, because that's idolatrous. It means, what does it mean to be divine? Masculine, old, stern. Sukkot is the counterpoint and the counter narrative to all of that. That's the classic stereotypical image of Yom Kippur. Big, tall, thin usually, bearded, white-bearded man judge God. Sukkot is, yes, that's true. Great. There is a judging aspect of God. There is a patriarchal or a paternal aspect of God. There is daddy God. And also in the same God, because there's one God. But God is infinite, and God can't be locked into any one image. There's also Sukkot God, and Sukkot God is loving and maternal, nourishing, and accepting. Both of these are necessary, and they have to follow one after another. They need to work together. Because again, it's not really they, it's really two aspects of an infinitely complected God. And that's the Raz of Nemnusa. That's the secret of faith, is that there's all these aspects of God, and it's not that there's multiple gods, cough, cough, Catholicism. Yes, 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 triune God, 3 persons participating in one substance, blah, 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 fine, except that, in a sense, the Judaism says you didn't really pull it off. You didn't really pull it off, sorry. But with the Sefirot, what we have is a technology to understand the multiple aspects of the one God. Because the truth is, if you look inside of yourself, and each of us is a spark of divinity inside of a hunk of meat, we see within ourselves infinite complexities, multiple sides of ourselves, masculine and feminine sides of ourselves, inner childs, outer adults, right? We are made of so many things. And Kadosh Baruch Hu, alachas kama v'kama, such that it's an infinite, because God is no thing. God is beyond things. God is not divisible in that way, shape, or form. God is both and always. Sukkot God and Yom Kippur God. They work together because it's the same God. In these days, from Yom Kippur through Sukkot, God takes the dandling, vulnerable, soft, weak child that's just starting out on its own again, and nurses us and provides for us the love and the care that we need to be able to grow. Sukkot is that cultivating environment. All right, pause. From the peanut gallery in Zoom, you are welcome to suggest also thoughts. So just take a minute to reflect, to respond if something is, again, outrageous or something is inspiring, exciting. Thoughts?
I have a thought or a question, or I don't know
Everyone
what it is.
here? All right, great, yeah.
So I remember learning once that Sukkah is actually the time when you graduate from being like an innocent child into sort of like an adolescence.
Mm-hmm.
But this is sort of saying quite the opposite. So I don't know. I was wondering.
Yeah, no, I would say that's probably a reading of Sukkot that focuses on the building of the Sukkah. Right?
Oh,
Like that, what you're doing in a sense in Sukkot is that you're learning how to recommit yourself. You're learning how to build up again when before you were kind of being led more. Someone just asked how we can read the text. So the text is being shared on the screen, but also if you go to the chat, the source sheet should be available in the chat. Susie, if you want to share it one more time, just link it up in case people joined afterwards. So that is, I think you're absolutely right that like kind of the version of Sukkot that focuses on building the Sukkah is like having self-sufficiency, is being able to engage in basically a construction project, like right after the kind of stripped down spiritual experience of Yom Kippur. Interestingly, though, I would say I think this reading is maybe a little bit more compelling from internally, because you don't make a blessing on building the Sukkah. There's actually a machlekes about it in the Yerushalmi, if I remember correctly, in the Jerusalem Talmud. Do you make a blessing on building the Sukkah? And the answer is no. You don't have to. You don't have to build a Sukkah to experience the mitzvah of Sukkot. You just need to sit in it. Now, of course, someone needs to build it. Don't get me wrong. And there's this beautiful idea that, like, literally, the first thing you do after Yom Kippur, you start nail one nail in the Sukkah. You do one little thing to get it going again. But there are a lot of people who, for a lot of reasons, wouldn't be able to build a Sukkah, can't build a Sukkah, live in an apartment building in which you can't build a Sukkah, right? Lots of different reasons, such that like there is an aspect of this that is not overly expectant of us. I believe the text the text document is a PDF, which I believe you can open up in Google in a browser, but it's not. I don't think it's editable. Okay. And also, if you notice, I just want to kind of mention this. This shiur, I wrote this shiur a long time ago, and it's really some Torah I really love to teach, and it's dedicated in memory of my grandfather, Irving Wall, Isser Ben Yehuda Moshe, as bring his memory, and he passed away in 2000, right before Sukkot. So around Sukkot, I always think of him. Okay. He says, "V'kolze miskayim gam b'mei Sukkos." But all of this is also existent and all happens also during Sukkot as well. So maybe actually this is responding to that point exactly. Besides not just the days in the desert, but also in the Sukkot. For since each person has already faltered in sin, they must make themselves terrified so they won't damage themselves again. So they must escape and take shelter beneath God's wings, whose name is blessed. Now this is interesting, right? And what I thought of when I saw this, because maybe it's like a little bit stark, a little bit intense, a little bit dark, is why is it the case that we say Slach lanu avinu ki chatanu in the Amida right after Yom Kippur's over? The weirdest prayer service we have is Mariv after Havdalah Yom Kippur. And part of the Amida is a prayer saying, God, please forgive us for the sins that we have done. Literally, Yom Kippur just happened. What could you have done? And the answer is, in a sense, it's not about blaming yourself, but it's about accepting the fact that we mess up. It could be the case that literally the second after Yom Kippur, you already go back on everything that you promised. You already lost your commitment. You already lost your nerve. And like you had all these like ambitions, and then like nihilism, the Yetzer Hara gets a hold of you, and you're like, you know what? You can't do it. Sorry, dog. Like you're just not up for it. And that little edge of doubt starts nibbling away at your heart. Even that person, and I would say especially that person, needs Sukkot. Sukkot isn't a reward that we receive because we were good little boys and girls and we get to be in a hut and have candy. Sukkot is the thing that we all need to be able to take this person that we're starting to become and to give it the love and the energy and the care that it needs to grow into the person that it wants to be. What does it mean to be in the hug of the Sukkah? It's to realize that no matter how much you might have already screwed up, that's precisely why the hug is there. Like, what is different about, let's just call it, again, archetypical maternal love, what makes it radical and unique and powerful is that it precisely is there because you don't deserve it. And I would say in that way, it's the deepest and most true form of love, period. That love isn't earned. Love is given. The notion of love being earned is perverse in a sense. You don't earn love. You receive love from a loving person, from a loving God, from a God who is love. And that, in a sense, is like that's the message that we need to hear after Yom Kippur. You go through this whole thing of being like, do I deserve it? And the answer, in a sense, is yes. And who is it that gets to deserve it? You. And whoever it is that you are, this is the one who is accepted. You are the one who is loved. And interestingly, he sees Sukkot as not just like a follow-up, a postscript of Yom Kippur, but it's the coup de grace of Teshuvah. Because there's a certain kind of Teshuvah that you do with a different kind. Okay, so there's two kinds of Teshuvah. There's a zillion kinds of Teshuvah. There's two kinds of Teshuvah. There's Teshuvah me'yira, and there's Teshuvah me'ahava. There's Teshuvah from fear, and there's Teshuvah from love. Teshuvah from fear is someone points a gun at your head and says, you better stop eating pork. And I'm like, okay, I'll stop eating pork. I'm sorry. No more pork. Teshuvah from love is, I'll stop with the pork example, but like Teshuvah from love is, I see within every human being the shining letters of God's name. And because of that, I need to make sure that the poor are fed, that the naked are clothed, that the homeless have shelter. Right? That's because I am drawn to it because I want to, not because I'm worried someone will judge me if I don't. Not because I'm judging myself because I don't. It's because I am positing myself in that kind of way. I'm manifesting myself in that kind of way. It's a towards dynamic. Agreed. Enough. That's Teshuvah me'ahava is a recommitment of yourself because of values and because of inspiration, because you love it, because you love to be the person you want to be, not you're scared to be the person you don't want to be. Sukkot is that nurturing environment you need to continue, and I would even say culminate in that process. Similarly, in our staying in the Sukkah, we must return in Teshuvah. It is said regarding this in Mishlei and Prophets, in the Prophets and the Navi, those who sit in the shade will return. Yeshuvo Yoshve Betzilo. Those who dwell under the shade of the Sukkah will return. It's like what's written in Kedushas Levi. In Sukkot, there's the Teshuvah of love. He says, okay, so opposite, right? Check there. To keep on going, number 6. There is much truth to that matter that this too is a trial. For the blessed Creator brings us close that we return to God in Teshuvah. So here he says, okay, I'm going to complicate this a little bit. What if this, in a way, is a test? Not a test in the sense of like, not a test in the sense of like you'll get an 100, you'll get like a 50 or something. A test in the sense of like you proof yeast, right? Prove, it says the exception that proves the rule. Prove is actually from the Germanic. Proven means to test something. You test yeast, you proof yeast, right? You're putting it in the warm water to see if it's still alive, right? Because yeast dies. Sukkot, again, is an incubating environment. It's like you ever in grade 1, did you ever get chicks and then you had to like keep the chicks alive? You ever do that? Okay, there's a little picture. Mom, don't share a screen. There's a little picture of me in like a macaroni frame, and I have this like little chick, and I'm very excited about it. So when I was in school, we got little chicks, and the thing was like, could we actually like see what it's like to provide for them the environment they needed? That's the Sukkah. I think that's what he's getting at. We have found in the regarding Aaron HaKohen that Rodef Shalom, Ohev Shalom, Rodef Shalom, right? God, he loves peace and he pursues peace. Ohevas Abrios. And what does it mean to pursue peace? It means because you love your fellow human beings. You love other creatures. You have love in you for other creatures. I think it's not an accident that like so many people during quarantine have found ways to bring creatures into their lives. So whether it's like people who get quarantine puppies, and like adoption centers are like out of dogs now, which is incredible, right? They're like people are adopting dogs all over the place, cats, or I would even say actually interestingly, millennial here, like even something like a sourdough starter or something like that, or plants, right? Plant moms. The question is, are we able to provide for ourselves these opportunities to love, to take care of something, to cultivate? Right? What's the language? What's the Lashon for a sourdough starter? You cultivate the starter. You culture the yeast. Right? What is a culture? A culture is like a culture of bacteria. It's a space for growth. You are providing an opportunity for growth through care, because it's only things that are cared for that survive and grow to live. That's the Torah of the baby. The baby doesn't. It's like the falsehood of the readings of Darwin. Right? The baby cannot survive on its own because, ironically, because the way that we are designed is that a baby can't survive on its own. It needs parents. It needs, chosen family. It needs a genetic family, whatever it is. It needs sources of love and care. So Aaron made sure to bring close sinners so that they will, the language is ashamed, but I don't think that's the right language, so that they will feel regret, that they will be able to have take the brave choice, the courageous choice of thinking critically about themselves and deciding to act differently. And they'll do teshuvah. And that is only possible. You're only able to make the courageous and difficult, to do the work of teshuvah if you are loved. That's the lesson of Sukkot. It's not teshuvah me'ahava of like, oh, I'm motivated by love. It's that teshuvah is only really possible if you feel loved. Love gives you the space, the safe environment to take the risk. I think that also then like helps us bridge the gap between the sukkah as shelter and the sukkah as rickety structure. The sukkah as a thing with a roof that can blow off, right? Is that it is that balance. It is that tension. It is that dialectical balance between security, shelter, but also vulnerability. Because it doesn't let you forget that, yes, this is a space for taking risks. It's a space for you to learn how to become, and perhaps this is towards your point, Susie, learn how to become self-sufficient. But to do that, we need to accept our vulnerability first. We need to be a baby before we can be an adolescent. We need to walk before we run. So these openings, these opportunities for tshuva, we're in number 7 here, only happen by means of distance and remoteness, as well as through closeness and intimacy. Right? And here, I think actually a future version of this class will bring in Winnicott and the notion of the good enough mother, because I think it's quite appropriate here. Namely, what it means to be a parent, and especially a mother, is to know that there is a time for closeness and intimacy, the time to be at the breast, as it were, and there's also a time to be allowing the child to individuate, allowing the child to cry through the night and learn how to self-soothe, right? To keep on dandling the baby is to actually mean that the baby can't grow and become itself. There needs to be a balance between care and closeness and mindful decoupling, conscious decoupling from a baby, to make sure that the baby is able to, again, towards that point, develop self-sufficiency, learn how to self-soothe, start to model what it's like actually, or mimic the parent, right? That's actually Jonathan Lear in his beautiful book that I will also bring in a future version of this year, Love and Its Place in Nature, says that what it means to individuate, and here he's a scholar of Freud, what it means to individuate is to learn actually how to find the love in the world that the parent is modeling. That's what it means actually, like, is to learn how to parent yourself. And you do that by internalizing the mother. You actually learn how to mother yourself. And you only learn how to do that because the mother is imperfect, because the mother is a human being. Because if the mother were God, then you can't bring the God into you, as it were. What you need to learn how to do is to see the aspects and the ways that the mother works. And you learn how to do that yourself. So here we have, again, this balance between closeness and the balance between distance. On Rosh Hashanah and the days of judgment, you feel that yira, you feel that fear, that intensity. But on Sukkot, you return by means of this closeness, this ahava, this love. And regarding this, it says, Shalom, shalom, l'rachok l'karov, right? Peace, peace to those far and those near and those far. L'karov, l'rachok. They return by means of distance as well as through intimate closeness. The yira that we feel, the intensity that sparks a lot of these processes of change and growth is important, but it can only exist because it is furthered and supported by the closeness and the intimacy of love. Okay, so here I want to move to the last paragraph, number 10, because there's a bit of an excursus that gets into a little bit of things. I want to, we're going to end here. Thanks so much to the Baal HaScreen. So it says, this is why it's written in Bavli Sukkah. There's a longer version of this with all the different, you see the footnotes. There's like, I have all the intertexts if anyone wants the longer version of the source sheet. So when the Torah says, after your ingathering from the threshing floor and your vat, you know, that phrase that's on all of our lips, B'solas goren v'yekev hakasu medaber, right? Talking about, and what is it talking about? It's talking about harvests, right? And what does it mean to have a harvest? It means to have a harvest to be able to take in and to gather in, but also to have the judiciousness to be able to filter out and to select for the wheat from the chaff. I think one of the really challenging things is, what do we do with the excess? What do we do with the waste? It's referring to the waste materials from the threshing floor. And what does that refer to, interestingly? This is an incredible thing you see in a number of different Chasidic texts. The Sukkah. The Sukkah is, as far as I know, the only mitzvah material that uses waste. It's kosher. You don't need a glatt kosher sukkah. And to think that you do misses the point. The sukkah is a resilient spiritual structure that transforms and uplifts exactly the things you think are worthless. And alachas kama v'kama ourselves. Again, the sukkah is a mushal. The sukkah is a metaphor, but it's a metaphor made of things. And the things are telling you what? The first metaphor we saw is that the sukkah, because of the halachic necessity of it, needs to hug you and embrace you and shelter you with its head and its arm. And now we're seeing, yes, and this, what kind of hug is it? It's a mother's hug. And a mother's hug hugs you, whether you've been good or you've been bad, because it says inside of you is something precious. Inside of you is something immensely valuable. Inside of you is something that cannot be judged as wanting or unworthy because it is inherently good and lovable. And that is what is deserving of love, care, and attention. Okay, so one of the things in the Gemara also is that Teshuvah me ahava can do something very, very special. Ha'avonos turn into zechuyos. It's not just that your sins are forgiven. Your sins become merits. That's the alchemy of love. Sukkot brings that to fruition. It is not that the waste material in you needs to be burned, right? Toronto City Council said you're not supposed to burn your trash. Good, because it creates a lot of pollutants in the air. Similarly, the waste material in the harvest should not be gotten rid of. Instead, what can you do with it? You can turn it into something holy. You can turn it into a sukkah. You, yourself, the things, the mistakes you have done do not doom you. And they do not cast you into a pit or they do not trap you in the past, but they are rather moments and opportunities for loving transformation as you learn how to mother, as you have been mothered by God and mothered by your mother and mothered by your father. Mothering as an act. As you have been mothered, you learn how to mother yourself. You learn how to provide and continue this loving transformative energy, this alchemy, turning your sins into merits, transforming them through growth. As you become someone new, they are transformed as well. Al yedei hachuka heim hahagana shemagin acharkach al habale tshuva. This is how is that done? It's done through chukka, and chukka is desire, but I actually would rather translate it as enthusiasm. It's done by excitement. It's done by devoting yourself, believing you can do it. You are empowered by this love. It is encouraging you. It is boosting you to be able to dive and surround yourself, literally immerse yourself in divinity, in Torah, in God, in the best things that you can bring into this world. And what does that do? That's the protection. It can only be if you feel protected. So we have this incredible, again, balancing, this recognition of both sides. That to be able to, again, to that question before, learn how to devote yourself, learn how to take care of yourself, learn how to build yourself again. You need that sense of protection. And I would say that feeling of protection. Sukkot is the feeling and the experience that we need following the radicalizing. And what does radical mean? Radical means get to the root. After you've been stripped to your core, taken down to your studs, right? You tear away the drywall of your house, and what you're left with is just the studs. A sukkah. That's all you are. You are just a sukkah. But the sukkah is more than just the materials. It's the materials devoted to a purpose. Materials seen as being able to do something and to bring people together, to bring people into it. So the sukkah is a metaphor for this embrace, for God's love, for a specific kind of radical maternal love that is all accepting and all encompassing, literally immersive. But in that way too, you see yourself as being able to provide those things to others and to continue this process as well. To feel protected and to provide protection. Ohev shalom v'rodev shalom. Feeling the peace, feeling loved and at ease, and then pursuing that for others just as it's been pursued and provided for you. Chag Zman Simchatenu Sameach. May we find the joy, the excitement, and the love that we can find in this holiday, especially in these times. And may that empower us and keep us ballasted in the ways that it can. Thank you so much for joining. I hope to see you all at a distance in person very, very soon. Thank you to all the Zoomers. You're all Zooming. And thank you all so much. I'm going to close the class now officially. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for contributing, in this weird hybrid environment. Otherwise, I would have time for a little bit more discussion, but I don't want to. Like ignore people here. But we'll be learning again soon. It's Cheshvan, and Cheshvan is exactly, I think, actually, in a sense, the continuing of this, learning how to sanctify the profane, but profane, sanctify the weekday. Cheshvan is a month of weekdays, no more holidays. How do we bring all the holiness that we've imbued, that we've gathered? How do we actually learn how to infuse that in the world? So there will be a lot of Torah learning happening. So keep your eyes peeled. We're going to have an introduction to Kabbalah class that will be taught soon. We're going to probably have an introduction to the Siddur class as well, or like kind of a class to help us learn how to pray by using the technology of the Siddur. And also we're going to be sending out a survey. So you could provide suggestions or ideas about how to keep the connection going, how to keep Beth Lita going even when it gets cold and we're not going to be able to meet in person as much anymore. Last but not least, we're having services this weekend. There's a link to register on the website or in the email. Service Saturday morning, Shmi Atzeres, and Sunday morning, Simchas Torah, in the tent, all distant, doing everything we can to keep people safe, but also be able to have in-person community. Thank you all again. Chag Sameach. And thank you to Susie for your stewarding of this class and co-hosting it and providing such wonderful support. Thank you to all of you. Yesh Koach. Chag Sameach. Good moed.